Sometimes in your search for happiness, you ponder the meaning of your life.
What is the answer to this great riddle, this enigma of the past?
Who am I? How did I come to be?
I don't have all the answers.
Look at all the innocent people.
People glorious and arrogant, valiant and headstrong.
Good people, happy people who live quiet lives and love each other.
Who suffer through no fault of their own except that they just happen to be alive.
I never dreamed you could be so bitter.
It must be, so that we can grow.
Huh?
And he sees in front of him all the inequities and inhumanities that humans perpetrate on other humans.
What is the answer?
It is a tale of a man and a monster.
Welcome back to the History of Being Human podcast in its latest iteration. I'm the host, Noel Armstrong. In keeping with my declared intention of spit polishing some of these older episodes and re-releasing them, I'm going to begin with the episode that started it all. The first episode of the podcast that was initially called Know Thyself was an episode called Know Thyself, which I guess was no big surprise. But in that episode, I talk about the history and origin of that mantra, to know thyself. Unfortunately, I talked about a lot of other things also, most of which didn't add any value to the topic, except I guess you could say cringe value. Not only that, there were many things I left on the table that could have made it a richer, deeper, and more insightful discussion. And that's what I want to remedy on this episode, and these re-releases in general. I want to make them far more worthwhile for you, not just by trimming the fat. I'm not just going to release more tightly edited versions of the previous episodes. I also want to add value in the form of context and application. So each of these re-releases will be a mixture of old and new material, because most of my current listeners have never even heard these early episodes. And those of you who have, I hope to give you reason to listen again by making it a much richer experience. And so with that, here is Episode 1, Redux.
Start at the beginning.
Yeah. And when you come to the end, stop.
Story is told that Zeus wanted to know where the center of his realm was. Zeus was the ruler of the whole earth by that time. And to find out where the center of the earth was, he started two eagles from opposite ends of the earth and had them fly toward each other. Now the truth is, you really can't triangulate anything with two lines, but Zeus didn't really know that. So the Greek gods were immortal, but they were not omniscient, apparently. These two eagles fly toward each other, and the point where they cross each other is the center of the earth. To mark this spot, Zeus takes a very special rock from his collection. I don't know if he had a collection. But he takes a very special rock called the Omphalos, and he drops it from the sky, and it lands at this spot. Now this rock was special to Zeus for one very important reason. When Zeus was born, his father wanted to eat him. And instead of feeding Zeus to Kronos, his father, his mother wrapped this rock in swaddling clothes, so it looked like a nice, tasty baby, and fed it to Kronos. And after everything was said and done, and Zeus had overthrown Kronos, and the gods had taken over from the Titans, Zeus recovered this rock. So this is the rock that Zeus dropped from the heavens. So he had this beautiful site, the center of the earth. It's near the base of a beautiful mountain, Mount Parnassus. It's overlooking a valley, a scenic valley in Greece called the Valley of Phocis. But he doesn't keep this spot. He gives it to his son Apollo. Apollo is the god of music, of art, truth, prophecy. He's kind of a do-everything god. But Apollo doesn't have any people there to worship him. The Greek gods always needed people to build them temples, play them music, tell them how great they were, a little bit like kindergartners. There were no people there because there was a giant serpent named the Python. So Apollo takes his bow and arrow and he killed the Python. And he took the giant rotting corpse of this snake that he had killed, and he buried it deep below this Omphalos, this belly button of the earth stone that Zeus had dropped from the sky to commemorate the site as the center of the earth. Now the site was inhabitable, so Apollo went about recruiting people to live there, to build him temples, to do all those things that he wanted people to do for him. And since gods are too majestic to appear to people without people just dying of shock and awe, Apollo took the form of a dolphin. He jumped on a ship, told the people to follow where he leads them. And this was a ship of craftsmen from Crete. These were Cretans. Of course, the word didn't mean the same thing then as it does now. And he led these Cretans to the site. And the people settled there, and they called the place Delphi. They actually call it Delphi, but we call it Delphi. And it's still a place you can visit in Greece. It is at the base of Mount Parnassus on this rocky outcropping. Beautiful site. And this was a very sacred site to the ancient Greeks. And it was sacred for several reasons. One is because of the Omphalos, the belly button of the earth, the navel of the earth, the center point of all of Zeus's realm. The temples that they built there were also sacred. The temple first to Gaia, Mother Earth, and temples to Apollo afterward. The temples to Apollo were the most famous. But the reason that this place was held in such high esteem was because of the Pythia, the oracle at Delphi. You've heard of the oracle of Delphi. This was a woman, the high priestess of the temple of Apollo. And she was renowned for her ability to prophesy and give advice. People would come to see her, they would offer gifts, pay her money. High dignitaries, ranking officials, not just from Greece, but from Thrace, from Lydia, from Persia, from Rome, from regions all about. And apparently what would happen is she would breathe in the vapors rising from the rotting corpse of this python. Not sure how that would give her anything but salmonella. But it actually sent her into an ecstatic trance, and she could commune with the spirit of Apollo, or the spirit of Apollo would enter into her, however you look at it. And she would prophesy. And the list of her prophecies is amazing. It's extensive. She is credited with teaching the Pythagoreans their moral code. Pythagoreans were a math cult, but they weren't just a math cult. They were a whole lifestyle cult with certain ethics and rituals and so forth within their community. She's also credited with warning King Croesus not to go to battle against Cyrus the Great. Croesus was a very wealthy Lydian king, and he came to consult with the oracle before going into battle with Cyrus the Great. She warned him off. She said, don't do it. But she did it in the way that prophets and oracles often do. It's kind of this cryptic statement that you could take in a couple of ways. He took it in the wrong way. He went to battle with Cyrus and lost everything. She's also credited, and this is very telling of her influence, she actually is credited with being the one that told Solon, the great statesman from Athens, that he should not become a tyrant, should not become an autocrat, but there were many people in the town of Athens who could be trusted. So democracy itself may be traced back to the Pythia, to the oracle at Delphi, this high priestess. Most historians would say that she was the most powerful woman in the classical world. I mean, think about that. The most powerful woman in the classical world was this prophetess at Delphi. So if we define power as the ability to get things done, to have influence, to get people to do what you say, that was the oracle at Delphi. That was the type of power that she wielded more than any other woman in the classical world. It is said by some sources that she could speak her prophecies out in dactylic hexameter. That doesn't mean much, I know, but the way to think of it is when Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, he used dactylic hexameter because it was so heroic sounding. So the prophetess, the oracle at Delphi, dished out her prophecies in this heroic verse, which obviously would have compounded its strength and its mystery to the people hearing it. So to inquire of the oracle, you had to come to the temple of Apollo at Delphi. And on the posts, the walls, the lintels, the arches of this temple were 147 aphorisms. These are called the Delphic maxims. They're sayings, wisdom sayings, and they were apparently attributed to the great ancient sages of Greece. Some of them aren't very wise-sounding. One of them, I think, says, master your wife. Sounds a little sexist, a little outdated. Reminds us that we are dealing with a patriarchal society. One of them says, teach your sons. Nothing is ever mentioned about the daughters, of course, this being ancient Greece. A couple of them sound a little trivial. Be hard to really categorize them as timeless wisdom. One of my favorites is, master wedding feasts. So basically you come to this temple and you're seeking divine eternal wisdom from these great ancient sages, and it says, get really good at going to cocktail parties, or roughly the equivalent of that. Some of them actually seem to anticipate Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth. One of them says, don't look down on other people, which Christians would recognize in Jesus' injunction, judge not. Another one says, live together meekly, specifically enjoins us to be meek, somewhat like the Beatitude. Another one says, don't swear oaths. And this seems to translate directly into the words of Yeshua ben Yusuf when he said, swear not at all, take no oaths. But 3 of these Delphic maxims were given a position of preeminence. They were esteemed more highly than any of the others. They were very representative of the Greek mindset and values as well. And they were placed at the entrance to the Temple of Apollo. One of them was basically, be careful what you promise, or it could be translated, be careful what you look for. Take care what you're seeking. Certainly good advice, certainly wisdom in any age or across any country boundary. Another one was quintessentially Greek. It said, nothing to excess. In other words, it's the famous moderation in all things. So those were 2 of the 3. The third one said, know thyself. And I would say that this saying, know thyself, had the most influence, was held in the highest regard among philosophers and statesmen, wisdom seekers in ancient Greece. And it came to be almost a synecdoche for the entire temple of Apollo at Delphi. In the process of consulting the oracle, this was seen as a process of coming to know yourself. And what the oracle would reveal most of all was something about the seeker who was asking her questions. The saying was attributed to Thales of Miletus. He was an ancient Greek sage, philosopher, mathematician. He was a pre-Socratic. In the history of philosophy, they divide everything into the time before Socrates and the time after. And Thales predated Socrates. One of Thales' students, the story goes, came to him once and said, what is the hardest thing in the world? And the answer that Thales is attributed with saying, which to him was the hardest thing in the world, was to know thyself. The same sentiment can be attributed to Socrates in the Phaedrus. I don't have the exact quote, but Socrates is being asked why he does not pursue studies of science, nature, stars, and so forth. And he says that the oracle at Delphi enjoins us to know ourselves, and since he does not yet know himself, it would seem misguided to go pursuing all these other types of reasoning and to get lost in all these other inquiries when he didn't yet even know himself. So this tidbit of timeless human wisdom is originally attributed, at least by the Greeks, to Thales of Miletus. But the saying predates Thales by several hundred years, and in some form or other it's over 3,000 years old. There's another temple, older than the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, hundreds of miles away, in a town known to the Egyptians as Waset, the same place that the Greeks called Thebes of 100 gates, and a place that we now know as Luxor, Egypt. There's a temple in Luxor where you can find the first historical evidence of the use of this injunction to know thyself. This temple at Luxor was like many ancient temples. It had an external and then an internal temple, an outer courtyard, and then kind of an inner sanctum. The outer courtyard was for people who were not initiated, had not reached a certain level of commitment or spiritual attainment, or gone through certain steps and processes to gain admission to the inner sanctum. So in other words, there was the external temple for the unwashed masses, and then the internal temple for the initiated. And on the external temple walls were written the following words: the body is the house of God. So for any of you who have been told, don't color on your body because it's the house of God, don't get a tattoo because your body is the temple of God, your mother was actually quoting these inscriptions on the external temple at the Temple of Luxor in Egypt, 3,000 years old. Some of the sayings that were written on the external temple were expounded upon on the walls or the inscriptions within the internal temple. And in the internal temple at Luxor, the following words were written: Human, know thyself, and you are going to know the gods. So the process of self-discovery for these Egyptians was the process of learning the divine. You could take this in a couple of ways as I look at it. You could say that what they're telling you is, because you humans come from the gods, because you're the gods' creation, you can learn about great transcendent self-existent beings simply by learning about yourself. But another way you could take it is even more fascinating to me, because we might be seeing some early hints of humanism, some early recognition that the gods are anthropomorphic creations. In other words, if you know yourself, then you'll understand the gods that humanity has come up with. I don't know which way they meant it, but the point is well taken. Human, know thyself. This was equated with the pursuit of knowledge of the divine. Think about how different this is than some of the more pessimistic interpretations of human nature in Christianity, for example. You've got to overcome who you are. You've got to crucify the flesh, in the words of Paul. This was not how the ancient Egyptians saw it. And it does not seem to be how the ancient Greeks saw things either. They thought that by knowing yourself, by knowing humanity, you could know the gods, that you could access the divine through the process of self-discovery. All right, so I'm going to cut off that first episode right there before I say anything else that sounds a little melodramatic. I think if you asked any philologist, any classicist, It's indisputable that this injunction to know thyself was revered among the ancients. In fact, its pedigree is so rich that it has now come down to us almost unquestioned, a bit of what we would call received wisdom. But if you know that term, you know it's not always a compliment. It simply means conventional wisdom, the body of ideas generally accepted by our society, kind of a cultural orthodoxy, if you will. But that doesn't speak to its truth. So an idea may be true or false and still be received wisdom. And that is certainly the case with the idea that knowing thyself is a valuable lifelong pursuit. You can find this opinion in everyone from academic philosophers to psychoanalysts to pop psychologists and New Age gurus. It appears that even podcasters are not immune to the allure of this maxim. And I have to admit, it seems so obviously true that it shouldn't even be carped at. I mean, how else are you going to make decisions that affect your happiness and your future, that are in line with your values, your traits, your tendencies, if you don't know yourself? At the very practical level, nothing metaphysical, just simple cause and effect. Anticipating what kind of effects various activities or causes will have on you is only possible if you know yourself. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly surprised and all too often disappointed when the job you thought was going to be so awesome is unfulfilling. When the relationship you thought would complete you leaves you feeling hollow inside. When you seem to be spinning your wheels in something you thought you would take naturally to and excel at. Most of these points seem so true as to be truisms, but I have to admit there's a counterpoint. The advice, know thyself, seems to imply that yourself is a static, unchanging entity, just waiting to be explored and discovered. Somewhere out there or in there, you can just dig deep enough, you'll find it. There might be some truth to that. There are probably some attributes that are stable over long periods of time. But isn't it also true that we are being created constantly? New experiences, successes, failures, especially traumatic events in our lives. They change us. We're constantly being reinvented. There is an old saying that the thing that was the most true for you in one stage of your life becomes the most false for you in another. This concept of knowing ourselves almost implies that there is a Platonic ideal, a static entity that corresponds to our true nature. And I don't think that's in most people's metaphysic at this time. And not only that, recent studies in positive psychology have shown that we have the ability to be happy in many different situations. It's not like there's one path out there that can possibly make you happy, and that if you don't find that path, you're going to squander your meager resources of time and energy, never finding what your soul is truly craving. That seems a little superstitious. And it could lead you to the mistaken idea that if you're discontented with this or that thing in your life, then you're probably not on your, quote, true path, getting what your nature truly needs. So you may compound the normal vicissitudes of life with even more discontent, thinking that you're somehow off course. When I spoke of knowing thyself, I was not speaking to the individual. I'm speaking about us, not I. What does it mean to be human? What does our history teach us about our nature? What are we capable of, both good and evil? And what do we have to watch out for? Those are the questions the podcast was created to ask, if not to answer.